understand that some of you all have classes or other obligations at 4 o'clock, and if that's the case, just feel free to sit quietly in the back there. You're able to come for as long as you can. If you're enjoying the food,
I'll make it worth your while.
it's going to make it worth your while, no matter how many times you offer us. Professor Blackman is an associate professor of law at South Texas College of Law. He specializes in constitutional law, the United States Supreme Court, and the intersection of law and technology. Professor Blackman is also the author of several different books. He was selected by Forbes magazine for the 30 under 30 in law and policy. Professor Blackman has also twice testified for the House Judiciary Committee on the constitutionality of executive action of immigration and healthcare. He's an adjunct scholar at the Cato Institute. Professor Blackman is also the founder and president of the Harlan Institute, the founder of Fantasy SCOTUS, the internet's premier Supreme Court fantasy league, and blogs at joshblackman.com. We're very excited to have him here today with us. Let's give him a warm Syracuse welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This is my first time at Syracuse Law School. I visited here maybe once a decade ago, but it's been a while. I grew up in Staten Island, New York, and we don't always go upstate, so it's good to be here with you all in Syracuse. The topic today is free speech on campus, which is generally not controversial, except when it is. About a year ago, I was invited to speak at the CUNY Law School in Queens, New York. And my topic was free speech on campus. A lot of the students didn't like that I was there. They didn't hear what I wanted to say, and they protested and interrupted me. I'll play some of the video for you. But my goal here is not to try and gain sympathy or try and talk about myself. That's not what the goal is here. I want you instead to think about 3 questions, right, that are relevant to free speech on campus. The first question is, who gets to decide who speaks on campus? Does the administration? Do professors have a veto? Or do students have discretion in who they bring to campus, whether it's Federal Society or the ACLU or any other group? The second question that I want you all to think about is, what constitutes a disruption, right? Where does a line exist between a reasonable protest and a disruption that interferes with the event? And the third issue I want to talk about, I think it's the most difficult. If students cause a disruption, what is the remedy? Is discipline appropriate to punish students who disrupt an event? These are tough questions which I hope to explain. Generally, when I come to a law school and I talk about a topic, it's not personal, right? I can talk about a legal issue that doesn't really affect me. But this issue is different. In 2018, I spoke at the CUNY Law School. I was invited to talk about free speech on campus, of all topics. How ironic, right? I was scheduled to talk for about an hour. I didn't get through much of my speech at all. I want to show you some clips of this event so you get a sense of what was going on. And I'll pause it every now and then to give you some feedback. All right, so here's the setup. This is a video of me walking to the classroom. Okay. A couple days before the event, I get an email from the students who invited me. And they said that students are planning a protest of your event. I didn't believe them, right? I think they were just, making stuff up, and they were making empty threats. But then I get to the school, and the campus security officer talks to me, and he says that there are about 60 or 70 people standing outside the room you're scheduled to speak in. And they're holding up signs, and they're shouting and screaming that they don't want you there. And then the security guard asked me a question which I'd never thought of before. He asked me, "What is your exit strategy?" My what? How do you plan to leave the building? Oh. He was worried about my physical safety. When you have these sorts of protests and disruptions, it's not only a matter of whether you're able to speak, whether there are actually physical threats that may exist. All right, so I want to play part of this video. And the scene here is I'm walking through the hallway, and you can see the sorts of signs they're holding up. All right? Let me play this video for a minute.
Okay?
Okay. By the way, my favorite sign by far is that one. It says your legal analysis is lazy and wrong. I agree with half of that. I won't tell you which half. So this is a protest. I think it's reasonable, right? They didn't want me on campus. They didn't want to hear what I had to say, and they made their voices known. They were standing outside the room, screaming at me, yelling at me, and saying an important message. This is not a person you should listen to. Now, I don't agree with their message, not at all. I think she'll listen to me, here at least. But I profoundly respect the means they use to protest, right? They use words, they use signs, they use chants, right? They said, shame on you. They said, we don't want you here. They called me every name in the book. Let me tell you something, this is beautiful, what you just saw, right? It was effective. And let me tell you something, it's unpleasant, right? You know, I'm not here for sympathy, but walking through that was a bit intimidating, right? Imagine if you get off an elevator and there's 7 people screaming at you and they're saying, we don't want you to speak. Do you still go and speak? Right? Do you still go into a room where you're not wanted? And that's why I think these sorts of protests are effective. They make the speaker question what he's doing, and they send a signal to other students in the area that this is not someone you should take seriously. Now, I'm going to play the video a little bit more. I walk into the classroom. There are about 70 people outside the class. How many people do you think are inside the classroom? Not many. The room's empty. There are maybe 5 people in there. What do we make of this, right? The protest was pretty damn effective, right? Social pressure is a really effective way of influencing people, right? If you see that all of your friends are protesting, you're not going to go into that room. So I think they did something powerful, but there's a risk here, right? When students are afraid or intimidated, and instead of going to these events, they sort of stay out, there's a lack of knowledge being exchanged, right? When people are afraid of speaking out in class or seeing certain kinds of presentations, there's this barrier to learning that goes on. After the event, many of the students told me that they didn't come initially. Why? They didn't want to be shamed by their classmates. They didn't want to be embarrassed. And that bothers me a little bit, not a lot, but it bothers me a little bit, that students are actually shaming their classmates based on sorts of events they go to. But I think this is all within the realm of free speech. You know, I think it's all permissible. Okay? Now, what happens next? I'm going to play a little bit more. Okay? So the room's empty, right? No one's in there. And actually, at this point, I'm thinking, I'm going to bring a lecture to an empty room, which is fine. I've done it before, right? As long as there's one person there also talking. But then they walk into the room. And this is where things start getting a little bit problematic for me. You know, they walk right in front of the camera. There's a camera there. But they don't just stay in the back of the room. They come into the front of the room. And they're standing right behind me, inches over my shoulder. This is where I start having a problem, right? When someone's standing behind you you can't see them. Right, of course, right? But when they're behind you, you can't see them. And it creates a bit of a risk, right? A risk of violence, a risk of an altercation arising when they're behind you. Additionally, you're all sitting in front of me. That's the usual rule. Like, the professors at the front and students are sitting around the back. I have the floor at this time. They're trying to occupy the floor to try and take attention away from me. But I didn't react, right? I didn't stop. I didn't tell them to leave. I sort of just went about my business. Right? So what's going on now? They're standing right behind me. I haven't said a word yet. I have not said a word. The guy with the suit over there, he's the president of the chapter who invited me, and he's trying to get them to move, and they're not moving. So I said, you know what? Fine. Just let them stay there. As long as I'm able to speak, I don't really care. Okay?
All 7 of you.
Shame on you.
You still have an opportunity to leave.
So thank you guys for coming. I'm here to introduce Professor Josh from the South Texas College of Law.
So he's just trying to introduce me, even say my name, and then we let him get a word out.
Freedom of speech in the context of university. Professor Blackman has written numerous articles on numerous constitutional topics, and he's given this speech many times before, and so Professor Blackman, everyone.
All right, so I'm going to pause it right there for a minute. You saw some of the signs. It says conservative debate is equal to hate. Josh Blackman is a racist. You know, the entire litany of signs. I'll let you judge for yourself on whether those signs are accurate. But that was their message. All right, at this point, I have not yet said a word. When you have these sorts of disruptions, you can approach in a few different ways. One, I could have just walked away and said, you know what, screw this. I am not wasting my time speaking over a bunch of students who are yelling at me. That's exactly what they wanted to happen. I was not going to give them that satisfaction. Another option would be to put my foot down and say, you know what, until these students are removed, I'm not getting up there. I could have called campus security. Let me tell you something. They would not have helped me. They would have said, sorry, we can't do anything. I could have also gotten up there and taken a different path. I could have started yelling at them, saying, who the hell do you think you are? Staying. This is my talk. You get lost. That have been effective? Not in the least. I've given them sympathy. I chose a different path. I said, you know what? They're here. I can't remove them. Let them sit here. But I'm going to try to back off and let them vent. Let them get their energy out. And then I will engage them. So I'm going to play a few minutes of this clip.
Well, thank you very much to CUNY for having me.
CUNY's not having you. White men and those who support white supremacy.
I'm not white. I'm not white.
Then white men and those who support white supremacy.
Excuse me, I think it was already...
All right, so what just happened there, there was actually an African-American student in the back. They call me a white supremacist, which I don't think I am, but they call me a white supremacist, and then an African-American guy in the back says, I'm with him, you know. I want to hear what he has to say. And they're actually shaming their classmates for basically enabling my white supremacy. Okay, but I'm keeping quiet here, keeping quiet. Okay, what happens next? One of the associate deans comes in, and she tries to lay down a little bit of the law. Okay, so I'll play this.
Everybody stop. Let me tell you something. The university rules are people get to speak. You may protest. You may protest, but you may not keep anyone from speaking. If you do, I have other things to do. I will be back, or you can resolve this yourself. or you can have me resolve them.
She never came back, by the way.
Why are you delivering braces to your school? Can you answer that?
Why haven't you provided support for students who are affected by speech here? You here.
You're not children, you can't talk, can't
Please don't hate.
Okay, so basically, the administrator walks in, says, if you guys don't behave, I'll come back and do something. Bit of an empty threat. She never came back, never did anything. Nothing happened, okay? What happens next? A professor in the back of the room screams out, don't take the bait. That is, don't take my bait. I didn't quite appreciate this at the time. I only figured out later. They thought I went to CUNY to troll them, right? To own the libs, so to speak, right? They thought that I went there to try to get a reaction out of them. So of course they gave me a reaction. That wasn't my intent. I didn't try to get a reaction out of them. I was there to give the same talk I'm giving to all of you about why free speech is important. But they're actually going to be yelling at their professor who's saying, don't react this way. Let me play a bit more.
Don't take the bait.
He is threatening you guys.
Okay, so now we're like basically almost 5 minutes in. I've not said a word yet. I've not said a word. But I noticed that they were sort of fading in their ability to protest. So I said, let me try to actually engage the students. And here's what I did. The day of the protest, the students handed out this little pamphlet about me with all these things about me that were frankly not accurate. These statements that I wrote this, wrote this, all these things were taken out of context. But I said, let me actually read what they wrote about me and respond to it, right? I had already abandoned what I wanted to talk about. I wasn't going to talk about free speech. I was going to actually use their arguments to try to develop this. I was making this up on the fly. I did not have a game plan, right? I had never done this before. I was like, okay, let me see what works and what doesn't work. So let's play this.
People who are actually here to hear me speak, I'll try. When I came today, there was a sign, and the professor is not welcome. And it says at the bottom, we reject the idea that his views, my views, merit space on this campus, and reject the myth of legal objectivity. Josh Blackman is not welcome at CUNY Law. Congratulations, you made me very feel not welcome, but I'm still going to say what I'd like to say. Thank you, I tried.
So again, I think a way to deflect these sorts of situations is always humor. In any of your situations where you have these sorts of conflicts, try not to be adversarial. When you're adversarial, you increase tensions. A joke, humor reduces tensions. And this is not what you see on cable news. It's not what you see on the radio. But always try to see good in other people and understand why they're doing what they're doing. Hey, come on, you guys. And understand why they're doing what they're doing. And you'll much more likely have a communication, or at least you can try. It's not always successful.
I actually want to start by using the one legal argument you actually gave. You said,
Come on, guys.
violence exists in the law, and it's a myth that law is inherently neutral. Okay? And you said there's a myth of legal objectivity. So let me talk about legal objectivity for a few minutes, right? Someone did some excellent opposition research. Whoever did this, I actually applaud you. You found that 7 or 8 bullets on various videos I've given out for years. But I want to make a few points. For example, you wrote that I supported the president's decision to rescind DACA. Now let me tell you something. I actually support the DREAM Act.
Right? And let me just pause right there. One of their grievances against me was some work I've done on the DACA issue. I've argued now for a better part of 5 years almost that DACA was not lawful. I support the DREAM Act as a matter of policy. I think the Dreamers should be taken care of through legislation. But I don't think that the executive action the president took was lawful. Okay? Why is this a relevant point? You can support a law as a matter of policy, but recognize that maybe it wasn't legal. They didn't see that option, but I was trying to convey this to them. Let me play this a little bit.
this might surprise you. I actually think the DREAM Act is a good piece of legislation. And we're a member.
Gaslighting, you know what the gaslighting is? Gaslighting is when you try and like deceive or delude people. Like you try and make them question their insanity. They thought I was trying to play like mind tricks in them, like a Vulcan mind meld, right? I was trying to confuse them. Hardly. I was trying to tell them what I think.
Oh, let me speak, please. And we're a member of Congress. I would vote for the DREAM Act. My position is that the policy itself is not considered the rule of law, which teaches a lesson, right? The lesson is this: you can support something as a matter of policy, but then find that the law doesn't permit it. And then the answer is to change the law.
What happened? Oh no, change the law. There it is. You heard it?
Fuck the law, right? That's a very good thing.
So at this point, they sort of lose it. And one of the students screams out, "Fuck the law." Now, these are all law students who I think are taking the same New York bar you're taking, so maybe they will help balance out the curve a bit. But, ooh, sorry, was that mean? Too soon? Oh, the results come in today? How'd Syracuse do? Bar results came in today, didn't they? All right, well, I'm hoping the CUNY kids help bump you up a level. Fuck the law, they say. Right? That's their answer to my legal arguments.
We're a law school, right? And it's bizarre when you say fuck the law when you're
So then one of the students says something that I don't think I appreciated. She said, "You chose CUNY because you knew we'd protest." She thought I went there just to get this reaction out of them, which is not true. I speak at maybe 40 law schools a year. Whoever invites me, if you show up, travel from Houston, Texas to upstate New York, it's not a problem. But they thought I went there to troll them, which isn't the case. That they weren't even familiar with someone who could be right of center and not insane, right? They just think I was this right-wing Fox News demagogue who just comes places to annoy people. And I'm just a law professor. I speak wherever I go. Okay?
Well, if you let me speak, let me speak. So fuck the law, right? That's a good mantra, fuck the law. You do. And I'm actually very impressed. Let me say this. I'm actually impressed that there's so many of you. You can be anywhere right now, and you chose to come out here and exercise your constitutional rights. You want to exercise your rights, and I'll do the same. And I'm here the same. So I'm going to express my views. So let me go down this list you have. You have this little checklist, right? I think DACA. Please leave.
So what happens next? You heard one of them say, "I don't want to listen to this." At this point, they were beat. They knew they didn't succeed in what they were trying to do, that whatever their protest was not successful. And what do? They leave. They walk out.
I think DACA is a good policy.
I think you're tired.
I think you're tired. I think you're tired. I'm a white supremacist.
This is really about CUNY law and how you let things happen. And shame on all you for how did you let that happen? I don't know
All right. So what happens next? They all leave. They all walk out, and I'm there basically by myself with like 3 or 4 students, right? The room's pretty much empty. But I then go to plan B. I said, you know what? I am not going to give my talk they plan to give. Instead, I'll do something else, right? Instead, I'm going to take Q&A for the next hour. Like ask me anything, right? AMA? Ask me anything. And I took questions on a wide range of topics on constitutional law, criminal procedure, privacy, environmental law, torts, criminal justice, death penalty, abortion, immigration, whatever question they had, I answered as honestly and candidly as I could. They had never actually heard a right of center scholar articulate any ideas. The faculty is pretty one-sided. And they actually responded well to me once the protest finished. I'll give you an anecdote. I know you have to leave at 4. I'll take maybe some questions in a minute, then we'll finish up later. But I'll give you one anecdote. There was one guy holding up a sign, and the sign said, "Josh Blackman is an oppressor." I'm an oppressor. And I talked to him for maybe a good 20, 30 minutes, and I gave him my card. So you know what? Give me a call if you ever want to talk. He sends me an email that night, and you know what he says? I no longer have enough information to conclude that you are an oppressor. Again, I no longer have enough information to conclude you are an oppressor. In other words, I'm sorry. Or that's a law student say they're sorry. The kid listened to me for an hour and recognized that I wasn't the sort of cartoon character he thought I was. I was actually a person who had some ideas they wanted to hear. But that only happens when you listen and you have an exchange and a communication dialogue. The students who left and protested, they never heard a word I said. It didn't matter what I said. And we never had that discussion. All right, I know you have class at 4. Let me pause for questions now, and I'll do some more stuff later. People have to get up and go. So questions for now. Questions? Yes?
Do you know to have the camera stuff set up whenever you...
I record everything. Yeah. Yeah, and by the way, all of my lectures are on YouTube. If you need property or condo lectures, they're all on YouTube for free. I record everything for a couple reasons. One, it's my insurance policy. You've had this happen where a student accuses a professor of saying X, but the professor says, no, I said Y. The video doesn't lie. YouTube doesn't lie. So whenever I have any issues, like check the tape. Also, students watch it. I have almost 25,000 views in this video alone, so people around the country have watched it. I always record everything. The new thing was I recorded the hallway. You shouldn't record the hallway scene, but I figured there might be something worthwhile to capture for that. Good question. Yes, sir. Yeah. I think this is an outlier. I've been protested once and only once. Hasn't happened before, hasn't happened since. I think CUNY is a unique place. It's a public interest law school. Basically, Bernie Sanders is too conservative for those people, right? They are really, socialism is too, they're Marxists, right? They are very far left, and they're very vocal about it. It's a unique place. I've never been anywhere quite like it. Most places are like this. You come in, you sit, you eat, you listen, you ask questions, you have a communication. But I've never had that before, so I hope this happens again. I'm giving a talk on DACA at Villanova, and I think they're planning a protest, so if they actually pull it off. But we'll see what happens. Good question. Yes. My fellow Staten Island. Anyone else from Staten Island by chance? I grew up in Staten Island. You can probably tell. Yeah, go ahead.
So the reason I reached out to you was because of the video.
Good.
I was a senior at John Jay College.
Yes. Yeah.
And around, I forgot if it was right before or right after this, but a professor at my school, you might have heard of, Carlson covered it. It was like a
Yeah, I was on Tucker. Yeah.
Yeah. This was also, I think, on Tucker too. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah. So a professor, and like this is predominantly they call it the cop college.
Yeah.
A lot of police officers, firefighters go there for 4 years, and then they take the test. So a professor had said during one of the classes, "Fuck the cops, fuck the police. We feel this way about them." So that's what it was said, and this guy ended up being his Twitter was like compromised, and they saw he tweeting all these kind of radical things there, and he suspended him.
Really?
And we never heard what happened after that. But I don't know, I think it's just kind of funny how this happened around the same time, but because it was a professor that said it, he was being treated a little bit differently. It was, the discipline was taken more seriously. I don't know, what are your thoughts on that? I guess versus students versus administration, same thing.
Okay. So a few points, right? When you're in a classroom, right, you're taking towards a Civ Pro, whatever else, your free speech rights are curtailed in an important way, right? If you want to speak, you got to raise your hand. And if the professor doesn't like what you're saying, they can shut you down. I think that applies to both professors and students, right? The actual classroom where you're learning is very much controlled by the university. This is different, right? I am not a professor at Syracuse. I'm invited by a student, not by a professor, right? These are not the same sort of forums. I don't expect you all to receive me with open arms and just taking notes what I'm saying. You can be hostile, you can yell at me, you could ask me questions. So I think it depends. Are you yelling fuck the police in a classroom? Are you doing fuck the police at an extracurricular event? Or are you doing this on your social media, right? If you're doing it in the classroom, I think there's more grounds to punish the professor, although it's harder to state school, because people have an opinion that you should fuck the police, right? Not literally, I suppose, but figuratively, right? I'm saying the F word a lot today. But in these sorts of forums, right, if my school were to try to punish me because I gave a lecture on, Obamacare or immigration, I think that'd be problematic. Now, as for students' rights, you may have seen there was a story at UConn this week where a bunch of students were walking around basically yelling racial slurs at each other. These two white guys. They weren't doing it to anyone else, they were just yelling at each other. They're being a bunch of jerks. They were suspended from school. And in fact, the prosecutor charged them with basically a hate crime. They weren't yelling this at anyone in particular, they're just yelling at each other, just being a bunch of jerks trying to one-up each other. This is protected speech, right? This is speech that's protected by the U.S. Constitution. And I think you have to be very careful when you start allowing the government to punish people because of the offensiveness of their views, right? Because, look, one day these kids at CUNY will become judges, right? They'll become legislators. And they will start treating my speech as if it was something that can be shut down and that can be uninvited. So I'm very cautious about giving the government the power to stifle speech. But a good question, I appreciate that. I know John Jay College very well. Other questions? Yes.
Just thinking about it at the timetable of the generation before us, that we didn't have these conversations so much, or the sensitivity of each of these conversations has been amplified and intensified to the point where you can't even talk about it. I was going to ask what you think, where did that come from? Why did that happen, especially in our generation?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think you ask a very good question. In the 1960s, right, free speech dynamics were very different, right? We had a fairly conservative society, and those who were protesting tend to be quite liberal. Think of those protesting the Vietnam War, for example. So you had these college campuses, we had these war protesters who were on the left, and then you had conservative administrators trying to shut down these war protests. Today, it's very much in reverse. College campuses are quite to the left. And in many cases, colleges try to, not suppress is the wrong word, but perhaps push down conservative viewpoints, or at least not promote them. And I think you've seen very much a reversal on free speech. That now you have conservatives claiming the First Amendment as a shield, and liberals say the First Amendment is not a license to engage in hate and discrimination. My position is free speech, free speech, free speech all the way down. If we don't have a commitment to free speech, then the civil rights movement doesn't really happen. If you don't have a commitment to free speech, then the LGBT movement cannot happen. You need to give people space to engage in ideas, or else you can't have any diversity of viewpoints. If you don't like speech, the answer always is to counter it with more speech, not just to deplatform them and deny them the right to engage in those communications. And I will make this point very bluntly. I defend some unsavory people, right? I will defend the right of the Nazis and the Ku Klux Klan and these other groups who I don't like at all to speak. Why? If we don't defend their right to speak, then you're next, and your perspective will soon be cut off if we start drawing lines. I think far too often today people take the position, I don't like what they're saying, so we'll stop them, but they don't look internally at what happened. In my own classroom, I welcome all views. I will never tell a student their opinion's wrong or their opinion's invalid. As long as you say it respectfully, you're not yelling and screaming, then I think we have a good position. I'm actually disappointed. We had another professor who's supposed to come here today and comment and talk, but he had some sort of medical situation, so I'm here by myself. So I'm trying to be as neutral and both-sided as I can. But thank you for the question. Other questions? Yes, in the back. Nope. Oh, you're too kind. So the question is, how did I handle this? The short answer is, I was making it up on the fly. I mean, I have some experience with public speaking. I've done cable news before, which is, I guess, somewhat of a prep for this. But really, I had one goal in mind, which was not to let them get under my skin, and not to show any sort of anger or resentment towards them. To treat them as people with opinions and to let them get their energy out. How I did it, I don't really know. I was. You can't really tell. My mom saw it. I didn't see it. If you look very closely, my hand's trembling. I'm not trying to say this for sympathy, but like my hand's shaking. So I maybe put on a good show, but it was kind of scary, right? At least in the beginning. And then it kind of cooled down, right? I'll fast forward towards the end where the room basically is full, right? The room's full at this point, right? So after a while, it kind of calmed down. But I'll make a couple points of how would I handle this again. I think I would do this a little bit differently. I think I would say, okay, you're all here. I'm giving you 5 minutes to say whatever you want. Put a timer on the board. 5 minutes, go. And I'll just sit down and let them embarrass themselves because they can't possibly make a coherent thought in 5 minutes. They weren't planned for it, ready for it. Then I go and I respond, right? Rather than trying to talk over them, let them show you who they are. Let them demonstrate what they think. And I'm suspecting they would not do very well at that sort of mission, right? But the key point is don't get angry, don't yell, don't one-up them, right? Because you're not going to win. You're going to look even worse, right? I actually look sympathetic here. Like, wow, this guy looks great, right? You got to play the hand you're dealt. Now, if the next time, instead of just yelling at me, they start getting up in my face and they get inches away from you, that becomes hard, right? If someone's physically in your space, right up in your face, do you leave? Do you walk away? What do you do? Do you ask for security? What if security wants to remove you, right? I thought that they would try and remove me from the room, right? Sort of heckler's veto, because they're heckling, they veto my speech. They're gonna have to remove me physically. I would not have walked away voluntarily. But you have to think of how you handle yourself. Maybe you guys in Syracuse invite a speaker later this semester who does have these sorts of issues. Make sure they're ready for this, right? Make sure they're aware this might happen. Make sure they know that the worst thing to do is yell at them. Always record, by the way. Recording is very effective. It's a good tool to show how these things operate, right? And not just, you take out your cell phone camera and it gets very ugly. Record the entire thing from start to finish, which is what I did. Yes?
I actually just came from Conwell. We're talking about the question.
Oh, who do you have for combo? Well, please tell him I said hi.
So we were talking about obscenity today, and I know
Fuck that. Yeah, sorry. Sorry. That's not even obscenity. I'd have to be really bad to be obscene.
one of our fellow students said that obscenity is not, it shouldn't be covered under the First Amendment because it doesn't add value
I see.
to society. The day before, we had actually talked about your hate speech and aggressive speech and how that should not be protected because it doesn't actually add any value
Yeah.
to discussion. Like the First Amendment traditionally is considered this, let's say, exchange of ideas, that marketplace of ideas. But obscenity or hateful speech, are they actually adding any ideas to this marketplace?
Well, a couple points, right? The Supreme Court has said that obscenity is not protected by the First Amendment. It's an exception. Okay, but what is obscene? What's obscene depends on contemporary societal values. Let me tell you something, my friends. As a society, we are fucked up, right? I'm gonna stop cursing. But we are really messed up people now, right? Try and imagine what would be objectively offensive to people and just look on the internet. I don't know what that even is, right? There was a prosecution in the mid-2000s for a pornographic film called Two Girls, One Cup. Don't Google it. Please don't Google this. That was not found to be obscene. Let's say it was scatological, to use the phrase, right? That was not obscene. If that is not obscene, then nothing's obscene. I think it's a dead letter. So I think obscenity doctrine is almost moot. Like nothing is obscene anymore. Now you said hate speech, right? We don't have in the First Amendment a hate speech exception. It doesn't exist. There are certain crimes which are called hate crimes, which is not really even a hate crime. It's a crime taken with a certain mens rea, right? Which is basically an intent to harm someone because of their race, right? It's just another state of mind, right? We actually have to engage in a crime, which is why this prosecution of these kids in Yukon who's yelling at slurs, I think is facially unconstitutional. It can't go anywhere, right? But even if we say, certain types of racial slurs, should they be protected? Yeah, I don't like them. I don't use them personally. But I don't want to be in a position of drawing a line saying, ha, this is protected, but that's not. If I call someone a commie or a pinko, right? Or I call someone a fascist or a neocon, right? These are offensive labels, maybe not based in race, but based on ideology. But they're also political descriptors, right? They're used by people to explain ideas. And I don't want to start drawing lines of this word's okay, that word's okay. It becomes Orwellian, like in 1984, of saying what words are permissible. I don't think the government should be in that role, which is why a mere word should not be allowed. The other example beyond obscenity is fighting words, right? If you say to someone, hey, come here, I'm going to knock you out, and then they punch you in the face, I don't think that's even good law anymore. I'm doubtful that fighting words is a valid doctrine. Because again, we offend each other so much. I mean, almost every tweet I get is almost like a fighting word, right? Just, all these stuff is just so offensive. I'm okay with people dealing with hard stuff, and I don't think the state should be involved. Yeah.
How did you get to private universities banning certain words on campus, and how are you going to get away from that? How valid is that?
Okay, so the question was about private universities banning certain speech on campus. Okay, so a few points. As you all know, I'm sure the First Amendment only limits state action, right? So this is Syracuse, this is a private college, right? The First Amendment has no respect here. But universities have a general preference for freedom of speech and expression, right? That's a general norm that academics promote. And I think even though you're not at a public university, your professors should still recognize why this is important. A university is a place to exchange ideas, and having speech codes is antithetical to that. Now, in some cases, universities adopt these codes to comply with federal laws like Title IX. Otherwise, I think those regimes are problematic, to say the least. But you do have due process rights as a student, and if the school tries to punish you pursuant to one of these statutes, you can challenge it in court, right? So there are ways of using federal litigation, but private universities are in a different ballpark. Okay. Other questions? What else? Come on. Yes.
My question would be, why do you think that these protesters want the government to regulate speech so that the person from the government
Isn't that the rub, right? Everyone loves government power until they're out of power. It's almost cyclical, right? During the George Bush years, there were protests against the war, and then there weren't during the Obama years. Now, again, you have everything just sort of goes in cycles. And my general libertarian position is I don't trust government, whether it's Trump, Obama, or Clinton, whatever his name is, whatever her name is. I don't really trust them, and I don't want them in the power. But they seem to think that once you have this sort of progressive hegemony, where progressives run the local government, then they can be trusted to decide what's good and what's bad. Of course, President Trump is in office now, and they probably wouldn't like the sorts of speech policies he adopts. Although Trump, for all of his warts, has been actually pretty good in free speech stuff. I mean, he threatens to sue everyone for libel, but the actual positions his administration takes are very pro-free speech. So he's always Trump always stumbles into the right answer in many cases, but not always. Yes?
Would you punish them?
Oh man, that's the question. That was the last one I flagged. I'm going to be frank. I don't think they should be punished. And again, this is me who just got as embarrassed in front of these people. I don't think what they did warrants punishment. I think it's a close call, but they shouldn't be punished. I think at a minimum, they should be given a warning and say, if you do this stuff again, there'll be consequences. But I think this was the first time they were doing this. I would just let them off with a warning, which I guess maybe a warning is punishment. I don't know, but I wouldn't actually suspend them or deny them the ability to do extracurriculars. I think that maybe goes a bit. Yeah.
If they cross the line,
Yes, then they should be arrested for assault and battery. Yeah, that one I'm easy on. If they actually start touching me, you can lock them up, right? Those are not words anymore. That's a physical battery, 1L crim. You can't touch people. There were incidents where people have been beaten up, they have been assaulted, they have been targeted, right? I mean, they were standing, inches over my shoulder. If one of them just lost it and just rushed me, I was by myself, right? There was one plainclothes security in the back. He could not have helped me at all. I would have been on my own. So there's a risk, right, if you're a speaker. Now, there's another case I'm aware of where the speaker was in a wheelchair, right? And there was a protest to that speaker. And the speaker said, I can't do this, right? If there's some sort of emergency, I can't get away from it. I can't defend myself. This person was quite old, and she was in a wheelchair. She could not. So you know what she did? She said, I'm going to cancel the event and do it by Skype. And I don't I don't fault her, right? She was an older lady. She was ill. She was in a wheelchair, but she did not want to deal with this. I am, thank God I'm mobile. I can walk around. Started chasing me. I could maybe try to run away. I don't know. Not really. I'm not very fast. But it's a thing to think about when you're a speaker. You have to deal with this stuff. But it's a good question. Yes.
So you drew a pretty bright line between an act and speech.
Yeah.
One that kind of told others to put on.
Yeah.
I guess I hear, again, in the timeline classes discussing like certain words are also very, very damaging. So what would be this conversation against that?
I don't think words are damaging. I know that's going to be an unpopular position at most campuses, but words, right? Words can make you angry. They can inspire you. They can depress you. They can do lots of things. But words by themselves are not dangerous, right? They're only dangerous when people agree with you, right? If I say to myself, let's go invade Greenland, right? Who cares? Right? I said a stupid thing. But if I say something that's so persuasive that people follow me and we go and invade Greenland, right? At that point, the idea becomes dangerous, which is the point. Speech in the marketplace that gains currency and gains acceptance is precisely the type of speech people try to shut down, right? Speech is only useful when others agree with you. And the fact that others agree with you means your speech was effective. Hello. Thank you. Other questions? Yes.
So, conservatives on social media get shut down basically all the time on Instagram, Twitter. How do we deal with basically the people up on Instagram and Twitter for shutting down their accounts all the time? I mean, they eventually get them opened up again, but it happens daily.
Okay, yeah. So the question was about conservatives and social media and what you might call shadow banning or even outright banning. As a threshold matter, Facebook and Twitter are not subject to the First Amendment. They're not. They're not state actors. So I will not use the word censorship to describe what these social media companies are doing. The second point to describe is most of these sites have mechanisms that allow people to report offensive tweets or offensive posts. And this can be abused very violently, right? Very often it happens where some random person tweets something, and for whatever reason it's offensive and it goes viral, right? People report it, and if enough people report, they shut down the account. And it can take time to actually re-erect the account when maybe there's no reason to do it. Facebook has this new thing, they basically call it their Supreme Court, where they can basically appeal suspension of accounts. It's not really a court, but they have this. Now, the question I'm often asked is, should the government be involved, right? In other words, should the government intervene in social media? One of the most vocal conservatives on this front is Josh Hawley, a senator from Missouri. He was a former law professor. I've worked with him in the past. I wrote a brief with him a couple of years ago. Now he's some big macher in DC, right? I'm still on the stump. Hawley has one suggestion that internet providers, internet service providers or content providers like Facebook and Twitter, they should risk, let me start another way. There's a law called the Communications Decency Act, the CDA. And there's a section of this law that says that if you post information on the internet that other people give you, you're not liable, right? That, in other words, as long as you're just an intermediary, you're not liable for certain types of damages and torts. Josh Hawley says, let's say if you're Facebook and you're shadow banning people, you can't get that immunity, right? The problem is I am very nervous about courts and governments going in and assessing algorithms and how they're deciding what to post and what not to. I think it's very dangerous. I don't know that there's a good solution to the Facebook issue. I don't think there is one. So my libertarian instincts say just let the market go. But I am sensitive that people say that their accounts are being shut down and their tweets are being banned and they're not be able to communicate in the marketplace. I've not been shadow banned. I've not been actually banned. I try and keep my Twitter as normal as possible, but I know if one day I tweet something and the wrong people retweet it with, go after them, my account's gonna be shut down. It'll happen to me, and it's something I deal with. That's a good question. Other questions? Yes? Yeah, thank you for the question. This was maybe almost a year ago now. The administration suggested that schools that don't protect free speech might be at risk of losing money. The president's executive order, as I recall, was pretty bland. It didn't actually have any threats. What happens next would be different, that the education department may actually put out guidelines of what's required. Again, when you're talking about government spending, right, when the federal government gives money, they can put strings on it. As a general matter, I think a good string is you have to protect free speech. But if the strings are too tight, that they restrict what you might call academic independence, that the ability of universities to run their own programs, I do think it becomes problematic. So to punt on your question a little bit, I don't know what these actual conditions are. But depending how stringent the conditions are, there may be problems that I would object to. But good question. Thank you for that. You guys are doing well. I was at Cornell this afternoon. They had very lousy questions. So you guys are actually kicking Cornell's butt. I'm very happy to hear it. All right. Maybe one or two more questions. Yes. No. Well, I mean, as far as I know, the U.S. government cannot issue an order to Twitter to shut down an account. I don't think they have that power. I think that'd be a violation of free speech. But I'll make this point bluntly. Not everyone agrees Twitter's engaging in protected speech. Some people argue that they're not, that this is not speech at all. And some people say that the FTC and other groups can regulate them. You know, what about Google search results? Could the government say that, you know, Google's ranking people on an unfair basis? Can they require Google to tweak their algorithm? I happen to think this is all free speech all the way down. That's my thing. But not everyone agrees. So maybe in Kamala Harris's universe, she could tell companies to ban Twitter accounts, and they could do that. I don't think they can, but it's possible. The other question is whether Twitter could suspend the Trump account, which they won't do because he's so popular on Twitter. You know, he generates so much people. I have an alert whenever he tweets. I get a little thing. And that way it can like, oh my God, what next? What's the new thing? Because you know, it's always like, okay, what am I writing about today? What are the reporters calling me about now? So I think it's bad for business for him to block his Twitter, but I think it's unlikely that she could ever do that. Good question. Maybe one more question. Yes. Well, the court has said forever that defamation and libel are exceptions, right? That the freedom of speech does not protect the right to falsely tarnish a person's reputation and character. There's a slight exception to that when you're dealing with public figures, right? When a public figure files a slander suit, he must show that the statements are made with what's called actual malice, that they knew or they should have known that these statements were false. And sometimes it's hard to show that. To the extent that malice is slander is an exception to the First Amendment, I think it's pretty narrow. But there's still, I think, a good area for public opinion. I mean, one recent case involved the boys from Covington, Kentucky. You may recall these were high school kids, 16, 17 years old, who went on a field trip to Washington, D.C. They were wearing their red hats, and they had this altercation with this Native American guy. And initially, it looked pretty bad, like these kids were taunting him, and it turns out it was the opposite, that this guy basically got up in their faces, and they were making a scene out of it. These boys then sued various journalists who tweeted about them. Some of the reporters actually took down their tweets, others didn't. And at least I think one district court ruled against the boys, although that's on appeal. But you know, when a blue checkmark journalist accuses someone of taunting this Native American and retweeted a million times, and then like a week later they post a retraction and retweeted 5 times, the damage is done, right? You have the ability to instantly live stream an event, give a skewed perspective. The blue check marks describe it in the wrong way, and these kids' reputation are ruined for life, and it's hard to get that back. So we may see these sorts of defamation suits against journalists proliferate depending on how this Covington, Kentucky case goes. Good question. Anything else? Thank you all so much. Oh, last one. Say over the bell.
Well, I feel a little last one really on this,
That's okay.
I was just curious, like, why is the court seemingly never taking up the propensity standard?
Yep.
for protected speech? It would seem like that.
Fighting words, you mean?
Right.
Yeah.
Great little speech. It is not focused on promoting social order or morality.
Yeah.
Instead, consider protection. Right about
You know, Chaplinsky was decided, what, 1940 something? It's an old case. I don't think it's good law anymore. I mean, the court sort of mentions fighting words in these categories. If you read Arvey versus St. Paul, Scalia tries to distinguish away Chaplinsky. It says it's not, doesn't really mean what it says. You know, what speech today would actually fall in that category? We're such an offensive, rude population. We're always taunting each other, right? What would actually say, oh man, that makes me want to defend my honor? I mean, I don't even know what that is anymore. Like, I've tried looking for this. There are not many Chaplinsky prosecutions around. It just doesn't happen. So I consider Chaplinsky a dead letter. I consider obscenity a dead letter. I don't think they have any salience anymore, to be perfectly frank. All right, I think that's it. Thank you all so much. I'm grateful for your time.